In the World Cup, there are some national teams that have made history, that have won it, that have achieved goals and positions that we would have never imagined. But then there are those that have done very badly, the worst those that were happy to face the World Cup, but then had a disastrous competition. So today, in this video, we will look at absolutely all the worst national teams of every World Cup, starting from 1930 to the present day. 1930, Mexico. All the national teams affiliated with FIFA 13 participated in this World Cup. There were no qualifications because 13 were already few. Mexico was placed in Group A, but football in Mexico was not yet that developed, so much so that 2 years earlier, the Mexicans had played in the Olympics, but they had gone out in the first round against Spain, losing 7-1. In this World Cup, they immediately lost in their debut 4-1 to France, and then 3-0 to Chile in front of about 9,000 people. The third match, with Mexico already on the verge of elimination, took place against Argentina in front of 42,000 people. Stabile's hat-trick and the 2 goals scored by Zumalzu helped Argentina to bring home a final victory by a score of 6-3. Mexico finished at the bottom of this group with 4 goals scored and a total of 13 goals conceded. 1934, United States. This time there were qualifiers, and just imagine the United States had to face Mexico in a decisive one-off match in order to make it through to the tournament. They won 4-2 with 4 goals from Danelli, a playoff that was played in Rome at the PNF National Stadium. Then the tournament started. This time, there was no group stage, only direct elimination matches, and indeed the team that performed the worst was the United States against us, the hosting nation. Schiavio scored 3 goals for Italy, Orsi 2, Ferrari 1, and Miazza 1 for a total of 7-1. For the United States, needless to say, Danelli 1938 Dutch East Indies Enigabum. Who are these, you might ask? Well, today they are Indonesia. They qualified in a group that was composed of 2 different Asian teams. The other was Japan. And you might wonder, but how did they manage to eliminate Japan? Well, the truth is that Japan simply withdrew, so the East Indies remained without an opponent. They were then assigned the United States, but the United States also withdrew, and as a result, they qualified through the mathematical process. Incidentally, the Dutch team, which today would be Suriname, as well to participate against what is now Indonesia in the qualifiers. But Fuma said, no, that's enough. They're going. Now, in this tournament as well, the format featured a direct elimination bracket, but the East Indies do a poor matchup, immediately suffering a 6-0 loss against Hungary. A Hungary that, for the record, had a perfect tournament, first beating Switzerland and then scoring 5 goals against Sweden, then losing the final to Italy. 1950, Bolivia. After the break due to World War II, the World Cup returned. Bolivia faced a qualifying round, but in reality, they never played a single match. Let me explain. Argentina withdrew, while Bolivia and Chile, who were in the group with Argentina and had advanced 2 out of 3, qualified automatically. In reality, Bolivia and Chile played, but FIFA did not declare them official because they would have both advanced anyway. Here, the group was reinstated. Incidentally, Chile was eliminated from its group, but it didn't do too badly, losing to Spain and England, but scoring 5 goals against the United States. But we needed to talk about Bolivia. Placed in a 4-team group, the 4th team failed to appear. The 3rd, which was France, withdrew, and thus only Uruguay and Bolivia remained in Group 4, where only one could advance. A golden opportunity for the South Americans. Too bad they lost 8-0 to Uruguay. May scored 3, Turquia netted the 8th, and while it is difficult to evaluate a team that has played only 1 match, while others have played 3, that 8-0 scoreline is something that weighs very heavily indeed. In 1954, South Korea was placed into a group which consisted only of 2 teams. They also did very well because they faced Japan, who were not yet so used to football. In Tokyo, they won 5-1, while the return leg ended 2-2. South Korea qualified. When the World Cup arrived, however, things were completely different. They were placed in Group 2 within alphabetical order: Germany, Turkey, and Hungary. Ready, set, go, they lost 9-0 to Hungary. Here too, Coxie scored 3, Puskas 2, Shiburo scored, but that was a strong Hungary to the point that they also scored 8 against Germany. The second match, South Korea faced Turkey. 7 for the Turks, 2 games played, 0 goals scored, and 16 conceded. They didn't play the 3rd one. On that day, there were 4 teams, but you faced 2 of them. Don't ask me why. I don't understand. 1958, Mexico for the 2nd time. This was a real qualifying round. In fact, Mexico had to face the United States first, and then Canada. They defeated the United States 6-0. While in the return leg, they even beat them 7 times. Then they defeated Canada 3-0, and in the return leg, it ended 0-2 again for the Mexicans. Having finished the group stage with a low score, they had eliminated both Canada and the United States, but there was another round to face, where they would face the winner of the other group, Costa Rica. In the first leg, Mexico beat Mexico City 2-0, while San Jose drew 1-1, also eliminating Costa Rica. For this reason, it seemed like they could do well at the World Cup, but unfortunately, in a not-so-great group where, in alphabetical order, there were Wales, Sweden, and Hungary, they immediately lost 3-0 to little Sweden, but they were the home team, and that was understandable, but then they drew 1-1 with Wales, recovering in the last minute from a disadvantage, and finally against Hungary, they lost 4-0. In the end, they still finished the group stage in last place with 1 point, 1 goal scored, and 8 conceded. It's not as bad as some others, but in this World Cup, there was no one who finished with 0. 1962, Switzerland. In reality, Swiss football was growing a lot. They ended up in a qualifying group with Sweden and Belgium and did very well. They won 4-2 against Belgium in the first leg, 2-1 in the return leg, and 3-2 in Switzerland against Sweden. The problem was that Sweden defeated Switzerland 4-0 and achieved the same results. They both finished with the same points, and there was a direct clash. The match was played in West Berlin, where Sweden lost 1-2 against Switzerland, allowing the Red Crusaders to qualify. Despite everything, however, fate was quite adverse. In fact, Switzerland was drawn in a group with Chile, Germany, West, and Italy, and it was devastating. They lost 3-1 in their debut against Chile. By the way, starting from an advantageous position, because they went ahead with a goal from Vutric after 6 minutes. They lost 2-1 against West Germany, and finally 3-0 against Dolgarelidas, Italy, who scored twice. They didn't do too badly, but they finished as the worst with 0 points, 2 goals scored, and 8 conceded. 1966 was Switzerland again. This time, in the qualifying group that was finally taking shape, they did very well, Cal. In fact, they faced Northern Ireland, the Netherlands, and Albania. They managed to finish with 4 wins, 1 draw, and 1 defeat. Never losing to the Netherlands, but losing in the debut against Northern Ireland in Belfast, but then they won. Almost all of them. Once again, at the World Cup, however, the level was much higher, and this time, too, fate was rather adverse to them. They ended up in a group with, in alphabetical order, Argentina, Germany, West Germany, and Spain. Brady's front set, they lost 5-0 to Beckenbauer's Germany. Unlucky. 2-1 against Irapai in a comeback, but in that last match, they also lost 2-0 to Argentina. Bulgaria was also in that World Cup and did not do very well, finishing with 0 points, having scored 1 goal and conceded 8, but in the end, Switzerland did worse, 0 points, having scored 1 goal and conceded 9. And then, come on, Bulgaria had Eusebio's Portugal and Pele's Brazil against them. 1970, to qualify, and Salvador won a group with Dutch Guyana and the Dutch Antilles. It was all Dutch. Dutch Guyana, to remind you, it's renamed, while the Dutch Antilles no longer exist. So they lost the first leg 1-0 against Honduras, but they turned it around by winning 3-0 in the second round. While in the third round, listen to this, they won 1-2 at home to Haiti, but in the return leg, they lost all 3 in San Salvador. Now you will say, so Haiti qualified. No, because at the time it worked that I won one, you won the other. It didn't matter how many goals, let's make it happen. It didn't matter happen. They made it happen, 0-0. Let's go to extra time. Salvador scored 1-0. Everyone went home and Salvador qualified for the World Cup in Mexico. Yes, it's a shame they were drawn in Group A with the Soviet Union, Mexico, and Belgium. They lost 3-0 to the Devils against Belgium, then 4-0 to Mexico, and 2-0 to the Soviet Union. 0.0 goals scored and 9 conceded. Amaman. 1974, Zaire. In that edition of the World Cup, Zaire, now the Democratic Republic of the Congo, was the only African team to qualify. To get there, they had to eliminate Togo, Cameroon in the playoff, and Ghana in that order. After eliminating these 3 teams, they were again drawn in a group with Zambia and Morocco. Only one of them went to the World Cup, and Zaire went on a crazy expedition, winning all 4 games. In the 2-point era, Zaire finished with 8, second with 2. However, when it came to World Cup, the level was much higher. They faced the very strong Yugoslavia, Brazil, let me tell you, and Scotland. Ready, set, go, they lost 0-2 to Scotland. 5 days later, Yugoslavia scored 9 more. But on the last day, something historic happened. Zaire and Brazil, with Brazil winning 3-0. In one of the final minutes, there was a free kick with the score at 0-3 for Brazil, but a Zaire player abandoned the defensive wall to rush forward and clear that ball away. It's the famous story of the free kick in reverse. They make fun of it, but in reality, there was a much more important reason. The dictator of Zaire declared that if they lost by more than 0-3 against Brazil, he would carry out extremely severe acts of reprisal against all the players and their respective families. That was a factor, let's say, of desperation, an act of desperation, and we'll probably talk about it in a dedicated video. The fact is that Brazil only beat them 0-3, with goals from Jair Zeguinho and Rivellino, among other things. And despite Zaire having a terrible campaign, coming out last with 0 points, 0 goals scored and 14 conceded, which makes them one of the worst national teams to ever participate in a World Cup. However, that 0-3 defeat against Brazil meant that they were able to return home safe and sound. 1978 Mexico for the third time. Here, there is a peculiar situation, because what did Mexico do to get to the World Cup? They won the CONCACAF, the Gold Cup. Played in 1977, they say that whoever wins the Gold Cup will also go to the World Cup to represent Central and North America, to represent something that should be, let's say, a given, right? Euro winners must go to the World Cup, but today, that is no longer the case. The fact is that it is a single group. Mexico has 5 games to play. They face Haiti, El Salvador, Canada, Guatemala, and Suriname. 5 games, 5 wins, 20 goals scored, 5 conceded. Mexico champions. Incidentally, in an edition in which neither the United States nor Canada nor Costa Rica nor any other national teams that could have challenged them qualified. The problem is that once they arrived at the World Cup, they proved to be still very big, not 3, and very small among the big teams. They drew a group with Germany, West Germany, Poland, and Tunisia, but everything went badly. But at the end of the first half, they took the lead against Tunisia in their debut 1-0, thanks to a penalty, but Tunisia scored 3 more in the second half, ending 3-1. Then in Cordoba, West Germany, scored 6. Hans-Peter Müller, Dieter Müller, and Rummenigge joined in the party. A shattered Mexico was probably already eliminated. The last match also suffered the fury of Zizi Bonek, ending 3-1, also against the red and whites. Mexico finished in that group, obviously with 0 points, 2 goals scored, 12 conceded. As further proof that the group was not even that difficult, both Germany and Poland ended up being eliminated during the course of the very next round. 1982, El Salvador for the second time. I believe this video is effectively demonstrating how late football in Central and North America finally blossomed. For the second time, the team that qualified for the World Cup from Central and North America was the winning team, CONCACAF. This time, Mexico did poorly. In 5 games, they had 1 win, 3 draws, and 1 defeat, and did not qualify for the World Cup. El Salvador did not win that cup, Honduras did, but this year, fortunately, the top 2 teams from El Salvador are going to play in the World Cup thanks to the expansion to 24 national teams. Well, luck was limited because the World Cup was a bloodbath. They were drawn in an alphabetical group with Argentina, Belgium, and Hungary. Ready, set, go, they lost 10-1 to Hungary. Hungary, who by the way, did not even qualify, and that would be the only victory they would have in that World Cup. Against Belgium, they resisted for too long, losing just 1-0. In the last match, they lost 2-0 to Passarella's Argentina. Here too, Argentina and Belgium were badly eliminated in the next round. For El Salvador, it was already a miracle to participate, but even here, there was still a lot of work to do. The 1986 Canada. Well guys, no matter which CONCACAF team qualifies for the World Cup, it is always the worst team in the World Cup. For Canada, it was their first participation, and the rule still applies. Whoever wins the CONCACAF Championship, therefore the Gold Cup, goes on to play for the World Cup. Canada came out on top in a group with Haiti and Guatemala, and then in the final round, they won 2 and drew against Honduras and Costa Rica, lifting the trophy. Mexico was already in the World Cup, given that it hosted the tournament back in 1986, yet Canada did very badly. Here, in some groups, 3 out of 4 teams even qualified. Canada drew France, the Soviet Union, and Hungary immediately, losing 1-0 to France with Papin scoring 10 minutes from the end. This result bodes well, especially since it was not the weakest team in the group. On the surface, the Soviet Union beat Hungary 6-0. The truth is that Canada did not do a complete disgrace in that World Cup. They also lost 2-0 to Hungary and finally 2-0 to the Soviet Union. Clearly, they would not advance. They would finish the group with 0 points, 0 goals scored and 5 conceded, one of the best worst teams ever. But the truth is that in that World Cup, there were not that many weak teams. We are gradually getting closer, at least in part, to a more balanced and leveled football. 1990, United Arab Emirates, and we finally changed continent a little bit, as we are now making our way over to the Asian one. The United Arab Emirates won a group with Syria, North Yemen, and Bahrain. Just for the record, North Yemen was Yemen. At the time, however, there was also South Yemen, which no longer exists today. It hasn't existed since 1989. Once qualified, the United Arab Emirates participated in a group of 6 teams. Only the top 2 of the best teams from the entire continent would qualify. In the group, there was also South Korea, which finished ahead of them, followed by 4 other teams that performed worse than the Emirates, Qatar, China, Saudi Arabia, and North Korea. Incidentally, the United Arab Emirates arrived in a rather peculiar situation. In fact, the only game they won was the home game against China, then they drew the other 4, and they only needed 6 points to qualify for the World Cup. This alone made it clear that they weren't all that ready, but if you hadn't understood that well, they explained it to you later at the World Cup. They were in a group with Colombia, West Germany, the strong team, and Yugoslavia. In their debut, they lost 0-2 to Valderrama's Colombia. Incidentally, at the World Cup in Italy, they played in Bologna. In San Siro against West Germany, they even conceded 5. Everyone joined the party, from Matthaus to Glisman, including Rudfeller. In the last match, they also conceded 4 points against Yugoslavia. Among other things, PDF scored twice. The United Arab Emirates finished with 0 points, scoring 2 goals and conceding 11. At least they could say they had a team in the national team that would go on to win the World Cup. Greece. After Switzerland's 2 appearances, a European team was once again the worst in the World Cup. At that time, Greece were making their debut. It was the first time they had participated in a World Cup, and they did so thanks to their excellent performance in Group 5. In fact, they were drawn in a group with Russia, Iceland, Hungary, and Luxembourg, and they finished first with 6 wins and 2 draws. Greece was a fine national team, scoring 10 goals and conceding just 2, and had an excellent, perfect, and balanced defense. The reality, however, is that on paper, that group was much simpler than they had initially expected. In fact, Russia itself was eliminated from the World Cup, the other qualifier in the group, winning just 1 match against tiny Cameroon, thanks to 5 goals from Salenko, but our goal was Greece. The Greeks were placed into a group together with Argentina, Bulgaria, and Nigeria. Argentina was Maradona's team, with Batistuta scoring hat-tricks against them. They lost 4-0 on their debut. Bulgaria was no joke either. There is Stokov, who scores 2, both from penalty kicks, and they lose 4-0 to Bulgaria as well. They were now eliminated, and also suffered a 0-2 defeat against Nigeria. Greece left not only with 0 points, but also without scoring any goals and conceding nets. Then their fantastic defense had just crumbled. 1998 United States for the second time. The United States must have been used to playing in a World Cup. They had played it in 1930, 1934, 1950, 1990, and 94. Yet from the performance they put in on the pitch, it seems that they were not yet used to it. In the qualifiers, they drew a group with Costa Rica, Guatemala, Trinidad, and Tobago, but qualifying was very easy. 2 out of 4 teams in that group advanced. The United States won 4 matches, drew 1, and the only game they lost was away to a Costa Rica side that qualified alongside them, though the Costa Ricans finished in 2nd place. Then in the next round, they were placed in a group of 6, with all the top 2 teams in each group. The USA had to face more competitive teams such as Mexico and Jamaica, yet they managed to finish 2nd. They had advanced 3 and therefore qualified. They qualified together with Mexico and Jamaica. The level of Central North American football was growing. For example, in that World Cup, Mexico advanced by eliminating Belgium and South Korea, then stopping in the round of 16 against Germany. Jamaica did not advance from the group stage. Argentina and Croatia were in the group stage, but they managed to finish with 3 points by beating Japan. Things went much worse for the United States, however. They were drawn in a group with Germany, Iran, and Yugoslavia. They immediately lost 2-0 to Müller and Sinsman's Germany. We're talking about Andres Müller. Then they also lost 1-2 against Iran, subsequently ending their run with a 1-0 defeat at the hands of Yugoslavia. The truth is that World Cup was not so bad. They scored 1 goal and conceded only 5. They were not exactly a weak team, but they were in fact the worst national team in the entire World Cup, based on the numbers. 2002, Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia is increasingly becoming a certainty at the Arab Football World Cup. They took part in the World Cups in 94 and 98, and it was no problem to qualify this time either. In fact, in their group in the first round, they beat Vietnam, Bangladesh, and Mongolia, winning 6 out of 6 games, scoring 38 goals in 6 games, and conceding 0. In the next round, in a more difficult group, they defeated Iran, Bahrain, Iraq, and Thailand. In this case too, however, when it came to the World Cup, the level had risen, and that fantastic defense of 30 goals scored and 0 conceded had scored and 0. Placed in a group with Cameroon, Germany, and Ireland, they immediately lost 8-0 in their debut against Germany, who were rebuilding after the disaster of 2000. I talked about how Germany had become irrelevant in my video, which you can watch here on the channel. In any case, that Germany of Klose, who scored a hat-trick of Balak and of Beav, won 8-0. This alone was the negative exclamation point of their World Cup for Saudi Arabia. In the last 2 games, they lost 1-0 against Eros Cameron and 0-3 against Robbie King's Ireland or Zealand. They finished the World Cup in last place, with 0 points and 0 goals scored and 12 conceded. One of the worst performances ever. 2006, Serbia and Montenegro. Today, it no longer exists. Serbia and Montenegro represented the nation of Serbia and Montenegro from 2003 to 2006. Then they split into Serbia and Montenegro. This national team only participated once in 98 as Yugoslavia, but they qualified by doing something bizarre. They were in fact placed in a group with Bosnia, Belgium, Spain, Lithuania, and San Marino. And yet something absurd happened, because in Brussels against Belgium, they won 0-2. At home, they held Spain to a 0-0 draw, just as they managed to do once again on home soil against Belgium. They managed to draw in Madrid against Raúl Spain, and won all the other games of Pori. Serbia finished that group with 6 wins and 4 draws, 22 points. First place Bosnia and Belgium were eliminated, and Spain were forced into the playoffs. In short, for everyone, Serbia and Montenegro were experiencing a golden generation. Incidentally, that was the Spain of Vidya Chiab, Alonso, Raul, Fernando Torres, a Spain that when it arrived at that World Cup would win its group with Ukraine, Tunisia, Saudi Arabia, only to then be stopped by a France that would make it all the way to the final. But despite that pompous qualification, Serbia and Montenegro would do very badly. In their debut, they would lose 1-0 against Robben's Holland. Then even against Tavez's Argentina, Messi, making his debut, Crespo and Combasso would concede 6 goals. Against the Ivory Coast, the story seemed to change. They went 0-2 up in the first 20 minutes, but let themselves come back to lose 3-2. In fact, they would end that World Cup with 0 points, 2 goals scored, those against the Ivory Coast, and a whopping 10 conceded. 2010 North Korea. For the second time in its entire history, North Korea is appearing on the global world stage once again. The first instance was in 1966 when they even managed to finish second in a group with the Soviet Union, Italy, and Chile, ultimately eliminating the latter two teams. Once they reached the quarterfinals, they only lost to Eusebio's Portugal, who scored 4 goals, but the match ended 5-3 with North Korea even winning 0-3. In short, a great performance. This time, North Korea qualified by going from second to a group with South Korea, Saudi Arabia, Iran, and the United Arab Emirates. In short, a very difficult group. However, when it came to the World Cup, things didn't go as expected. In South Africa, as a matter of fact, North Korea was placed into a group together with the Ivory Coast, Brazil, and also Portugal. And in their debut against Brazil, they lost, but only 2-1. Mount and Delano scored, but it was a fair result. In fact, it showed how the North Korean movement was improving from a footballing point of view. It is a pity that a few days later in Cape Town, Portugal went on to defeat them by a score of 7-0. Among the various goals scored by Thiago and Raul Melis, the last goal was scored by Cristiano Ronaldo. A very heavy result. Really very heavy. On the final day, they also lost 0-3 to the Ivory Coast, with goals coming from Yaya Toure and Kalou among the others. North Korea finished the group stage in last place with 0 points, 1 goal scored and 12 conceded. 2014 Cameroon was by now a national team that we had become accustomed to seeing at the World Cup. They had participated in 2010, but also in 2002, as well as in various other situations. This was their 6th appearance. They qualified by finishing first in a group with Libya, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, and Togo, and then eliminating Tunisia by scoring 4 goals. This was the Cameroon of Choupo-Moting, but it was still the Cameroon of Samuel Eto'o. However, in the group stage, fate was against them in the draw. They were drawn into a group with host nation Brazil, an excellent Mexico that had become a stable side, and a Croatia that was clearly on the rise. They immediately lost 1 in Mexico with a goal from Peralta. The problem came later, however. They conceded 4 goals, both to Croatia, Olic, Perisic, and Mandzukic, but also to Brazil, Neymar, Fred, and Fernandinho. The Africans finished the group stage with 0 points, 1 goal scored, and 9 conceded. 2018 Panama. There are a few certainties, one of which is that every now and then a North American team is the worst in the World Cup. In this context, Panama had never qualified. They did so first by finishing second in a group with Costa Rica, Haiti, and Jamaica, and then by finishing third in a group with all the teams that had finished in the first 2 places. The absurd thing is that they did so by eliminating the United States. In fact, the standings read: Mexico 21, Costa Rica 16, Panama 13, Honduras 13, United States 12. With the United States extremely behind, in fact, it was not enough to defeat Panama 4-0 with goals from Altidore and Pudlisic on the penultimate day, but by losing 2-1 to Trinidad and Tobago, combined with Panama's 2-1 victory over Costa Rica, they allowed the Los Analeros to qualify for the World Cup for the very first time in their history. Yes, it was a shame that in Group G it was a bloodbath. They drew Belgium, England, and Tunisia. They immediately lost 3-0 to Belgium. Mertens and Lukaku scored twice. Then they even conceded 6 goals against England. Kane scored 3, Stones 2, Lingard 1. On the final match day, they even lost to Tunisia, taking a 1-0 lead, but eventually allowing them to come back and win. In the end, they lost all 3, finishing with 2 goals scored and 11 conceded. 2022 Qatar. And this is a twist because there is little to tell here, but also a lot. Qatar had never qualified a World Cup before that time, and they did not manage to qualify in this specific instance either. They are the host team. The World Cup is played at home. They are debutants, and they didn't have to play any matches to get there. And yet one says, well, they are the host team, you'll see they will do well. No, they are the worst team in the World Cup, and it has never happened that a host national team did so badly. Not even this year, even though there were 3 of them, yet all 3 of them have advanced. Qatar did not have an easy group. They got EOR, the Netherlands, and Senegal. Ready and set, they lost 0-2 to EOR with a double from Valencia. They will seem like quite the opponent to face. Just think that Ecuador together with Qatar will not advance from the group. That Qatar at home in D will also lose the second match against Senegal 3-1. As if that weren't enough, the last match was against the Netherlands, the strongest team available. Gakpo and Frankie de Jong would score the goals for the 2-0 win. Qatar would also lose that match. They would finish the group in last place with 0 points, scoring 1 goal and conceding 7. No goal scoring, but you can understand that for a host team, it was truly a terrible result. For the record, in that World Cup, there was no other team that finished their group with 0 points except for Canada, who, however, scored one more goal. 2026 World Cup Iraq. In reality, many national teams have tried to take this place away from Iraq. Haiti lost all 3 games, scoring 2 goals and conceding 8. Tunisia, the great failure of this World Cup, scored 2 goals, conceded 12, and ended up losing all 3 of their matches. More or less the same trend as Bistan, who scored 2 goals and conceded 11, but there is a national team that did even worse, Iraq. Yuck. They were participating in the World Cup for the second time after their performance in 1986, and were the last to qualify, which also explains why Iraq put in such a poor performance. In the qualifiers, they came first in a group with Indonesia, Vietnam, and the Philippines, winning all their games. This allowed them to be drawn into Group B for the following round. However, in a group featuring South Korea, Jordan, Oman, Palestine, and Kuwait, they achieved 4 victories, 3 draws, and 3 defeats, ultimately finishing in 3rd place. Now, for the 3rd place teams, there was the possibility of going to another round while the first 2 had qualified. Now, there was a new round. They were placed into Group B alongside Saudi Arabia and Indonesia, only to find that they did not manage to win that group either. Saudi Arabia won and qualified. They finished in 2nd place, and this gave them the opportunity to participate in another competition. They were then paired against the United Arab Emirates. After drawing 1-1 in Abu Dhabi, the return leg saw the United Arab Emirates take a 1-0 lead. They equalized through Ali in the 66th minute, and then in the 90th minute plus 17 minutes of injury time, Iraq scored the goal to make it 2-1 by LFI. Now you might say, they qualified here? No, because this victory did not take them to the World Cup, but to the Interzone, so they still had to play another match. They faced Bolivia in the Interzone playoff, winning 2-1, and finally qualifying for the World Cup tournament as a result of that victory. Unfortunately for them, they ended up in a group stage with 3 very strong national teams, France, Norway, and Senegal. At their debut, they played rather poorly, even drawing at 1 point, but then they conceded 4 goals against the Norway side led by Haaland. Against France, they lost 3-0, with Mbappe scoring twice and Ousmane Dembele scoring. Finally, in the last match against a Senegal team that needed to score, they lost 5-0. The final standings say France 9, Norway 6, Senegal 3, Iraq 0 with 1 goal scored, and a whopping 12 conceded. This is the worst national team in this World Cup. This, guys, was the video where I went on to list all of the worst national football teams throughout the history of the World Cup. Let me know what you think with a comment below, subscribe to the channel and tell me why, because if you enjoyed this video, it is highly likely that this next one will also be to your liking.